Willie Nelson has always said he could put his feelings into a song better than he could speak them out loud. He wasn't joking. For 92 years, he let the world believe he was the Buddha of country music. The man who never held a grudge, never raised his voice, never carried bitterness. But that was only half the truth. Time has a way of stripping a man down to honesty. And in these late years of his life, Willie isn't preaching peace anymore. He's naming names. 7 artists who, in his eyes, crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. Some betrayed him. Some mocked what he believed in. Some broke his heart. And one is the last person anyone ever expected Willie Nelson to hate. Garth Brooks was a name people in Nashville spoke with awe, the kind of star who filled arenas the way preachers used to fill revival tents. But to Willie Nelson, Garth represented something very different, something hollow, something polished, something dangerously close to the death of everything Willie believed country music stood for. Long before the crowds, long before the pyrotechnics, long before the billion-dollar tours, Willie had watched him rise with a wary eye, not out of envy. Willie was never wired that way. It was deeper, older, rooted in the kind of instinct only men who have lived hard lives can recognize in an instant. Back in the early 90s, Willie was still hauling trigger through dusty Texas fairs, singing to crowds that smelled like barbecue smoke and warm beer, crowds who came to hear stories, not see a spectacle. And then there was Garth, flying across stadium ceilings, dropping into spotlights with explosions booming behind him, transforming country music into a rock opera circus. Fans called it revolutionary. Executives called it the future. But Willie stood in the wings one night, watching the whole thing unfold like a funeral for the kind of country he'd grown up inside. To the crowd, it was magic. To him, it felt like the moment the genre started forgetting where it came from. He never forgot the night he whispered to a bandmate, "You can't sell struggle if you've never lived it." It wasn't said with anger. It was said with the quiet disappointment of a man who had slept in cars, played for food, and written songs with callous hands, watching someone turn the music he loved into a polished spectacle. Garth sang about friends in low places like he'd studied them, not lived among them. The hits were massive, but to Willie, they were missing the dirt, the bruise, the truth. Things simmered quietly until 2004, when the tension finally snapped. That night, the Country Music Hall of Fame dressing rooms were buzzing with chatter, cameras, and polite celebrity smiles. On stage, Garth Brooks delivered a glowing tribute to Willie, praising him as a conscience of country music. It looked sincere. The audience melted. The cameras captured every soft glance and sentimental line. But backstage was a different story. Willie walked right up to Garth after the speech. No cameras, no applause, just 2 men face to face. Willie looked him dead in the eyes and said, with that low, steady tone only he could pull off, "Next time, say it like you mean it." No anger, no theatrics, just the truth, raw and unvarnished. That sentence spread across Nashville faster than wildfire in dry wind. It wasn't loud, but it was lethal. People who'd known Willie for decades said they had never heard him speak with that kind of finality. After that night, he refused every duet invitation, every joint performance, every photo op involving Garth Brooks. If Garth was scheduled to appear, Willie was suddenly unavailable. If Garth asked for a collaboration, the answer came back silent or cold. To outsiders it looked petty. To insiders it was principle. Willie believed Garth had traded the soul of country for the spectacle of fame. And Willie Nelson, 92 years old, bruised by life but unbroken, never stood next to him again. 2. Willie Nelson never cared much for glitter. He never needed flashing lights or dancers or dramatic costume changes to prove a point. For Willie, the heart of country music had always been simple: a guitar, a story, and the truth. But when Shania Twain took over the world in the late 90s, Willie watched something shift in the genre he loved more than life itself, and it hit him in a place deeper than anger. It felt like watching someone repaint his childhood home without asking permission or understanding the history behind those old walls. Shania was unstoppable, radiant, magnetic. Her voice was everywhere, on radios, music videos, billboards, morning shows. And she wasn't just topping charts. She was reinventing country music in real time. But where Nashville saw innovation, Willie saw something more painful, a slow erosion of the honesty he believed country music was built on. He watched her music videos with their choreography and their bright lights and their glossy production, and he would shake his head with a heaviness only an old soul could understand. He once muttered to a sound engineer on tour, "Country's supposed to bleed, not sparkle," and it was one of those lines that slipped out in like a confession rather than a criticism. Their worlds collided quietly at first. Shania's songs, "Man, I Feel Like a Woman," "That Don't Impress Me Much," "You're Still the One," weren't just hits. They became cultural moments. Nashville celebrated her like a queen. People said she was bringing new life into the genre. Willie felt like she was draining something sacred from it. He didn't hate her as a person. He didn't even dislike her success. But to him, she symbolized a shift away from rawness, away from the dust and heartache he grew up playing in, towards something polished so smoothly it no longer had an edge. The turning point came the night she won Entertainer of the Year at the CMA Awards. Cameras caught Willie in the audience clapping politely, but his face stayed still, too still. He wasn't angry at her. He was grieving for the music. When the show ended, Shania walked toward him backstage with a kind of grace that made people love her. She smiled, held out her hand, tried to greet him with respect. Willie nodded once, barely, and walked right past her. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it was the kind of gesture that echoes for years. To everyone watching, it seemed cold. To Willie, it was honesty. She had turned country into choreography, and he couldn't celebrate that no matter how kind she was. People whispered about his reaction. Some called him stubborn. Some said he didn't understand the times. But Willie knew exactly what he was feeling. He believed she had traded stories for spectacle, authenticity for formulas, and broken the spine of a genre that used to cry with every note. And even now, so many years later, if someone brings up Shania Twain's name around Willie Nelson, he doesn't rant or gossip. He simply shifts the subject, gently and quietly, like a man turning away from a memory he doesn't want to relive. Because for him, Shania wasn't an enemy. She was a reminder of the moment country music lost a piece of its soul, and the moment Willie realized he was part of a world that was moving on without him. 3. There are betrayals you see coming, and there are betrayals that blindside you because they come from the person you never imagined would hurt you. For Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings was that person. Their bond wasn't built on convenience or industry politics. It was built on long nights, shared cigarettes, cheap motel rooms, and 1,000 miles of highway rolling beneath the wheels of tour buses that barely held together. They created an era together, the outlaw movement, a revolution that shook Nashville to its knees. They were brothers in every way that mattered, until they weren't. It didn't happen with one argument or one mistake. It started like most heartbreaks do, slowly, quietly, like a thin crack forming in a glass window. By the late 70s, fame had wrapped Waylon in a grip stronger than he realized. And with that fame came something darker: bitterness, jealousy, comparisons he never asked for but couldn't escape. Waylon hated reading headlines that said, "Willie and Waylon." He wanted his name first. He wanted his legacy framed without standing in Willie's shadow. While Willie drifted through life with gentle calm, Waylon simmered with an edge that grew sharper every year. People who were there say it began showing in the smallest ways. Waylon rolling his eyes anytime someone called Willie the face of outlaw country. Showing up late to sessions and blaming it on Willie's hippie energy. Slamming doors. Snatching guitar cables. Drinking too hard, too fast, too often. And Willie just kept playing. Smiling that soft smile that didn't fool the people who really knew him. He felt every shift in Waylon's tone, every jab wrapped in a joke, every moment the brotherhood slipped another inch out his hands. Then came the night everything snapped. They were in the studio, recording a track that should have been easy, something they could have done in their sleep. But Waylon was tense, pacing, irritated. Finally, he turned to Willie, red-faced with frustration, and shouted, "You're too stoned to play straight." The room fell silent. Willie didn't yell back. He didn't defend himself. He just smiled a small, tired smile and looked down at his guitar. But inside, something cracked. The real break came a little later, during a joint interview. Cameras flashing, reporters gathered, microphones everywhere. Waylon, half joking but fully bitter, looked dead at the journalist and said Willie was a hippie in cowboy boots who'd forgotten where he came from. The reporters laughed. Cameras clicked. But Willie didn't laugh. He didn't even pretend to. He stood there, quiet, his eyes harder than anyone was used to seeing. And when the interview ended, he simply walked away. No goodbye, no goodnight, no anger in his voice. Just a quiet exit from a friendship that suddenly felt too heavy to carry. They never fixed it. Not really. Not ever. They still crossed paths. Still shared stages when the industry forced it. Still smiled in photos because fans needed to believe the Outlaw brothers hadn't fractured. But behind closed doors, the call stopped. The late-night jam sessions disappeared. The trust evaporated. When Waylon Jennings died in 2002, people expected Willie to stand front row at the funeral, maybe even sing him home with a trembling voice and trigger across his knee. But Willie stayed away. Not out of anger, out of heartbreak too deep to perform. Instead, he sent flowers and a handwritten note that simply said, "See you on the road somewhere." Those who knew him said that line was Willie's way of admitting two things at once, that he still loved Waylon and that the pain between them never fully healed. Because some losses don't break like storms. They break like slow sunsets, quiet, unavoidable, and leaving a darkness you never truly get used to. 4. Willie Nelson never hated loudly. He never shouted, never slammed doors, never took his grudges to the newspapers. But Toby Keith was different. He represented a kind of loud, chest-beating patriotism that rubbed Willie in all the wrong ways. It wasn't just about politics. It wasn't even about style. It was about what Willie believed music was supposed to be: a healer, a bridge, a way to soften the wounds of a hard world. Toby, in Willie's eyes, used music like a weapon. Their tension didn't begin with an argument. It began with a song, courtesy of the Red, White, and Blue. Toby's anthem stormed the charts, filled stadiums, and shook the country with its fire. To millions, it was strength. To Willie, it felt like a punch disguised as pride. He listened to it once on the bus, eyes half closed, then reached forward and quietly switched it off. "A guitar shouldn't wave a flag," he muttered. And those around him understood exactly what he meant. The moment everything broke happened at a veteran benefit show in Austin. Willie agreed to perform because he believed in unity, in peace, in giving comfort to the people who carried the scars of war. He walked on stage gently, singing a slow, aching ballad that made the room go still. His voice cracked once, and the silence after that crack was so full it could have burst. Then Toby took the stage. He charged in waving a giant flag, shouting slogans, turning the night into something that looked less like a benefit and more like a rally. The crowd went wild, but Willie stood backstage, arms folded, eyes sad, watching a moment meant for healing get swallowed up by noise. When Toby came off stage, sweat on his forehead and pride in his eyes, Willie stopped him gently. No anger, no raised voice, just the calm honesty he carried for most of his life. "You're using music to fight," he said, "not to heal." Toby laughed, a quick, sharp laugh, and clapped Willie on the shoulder like he'd just heard an old man mumbling nonsense. Then he walked away. And that laugh stayed with Willie longer than the argument ever would have. From that night on, there was no fixing it. No duet, no collaboration, no shared lineup. Whenever organizers reached out with benefit concerts, festivals, or tribute shows featuring Toby Keith, Willie simply declined. Quietly, without debate, without explanation. He would just shake his head and say, "I've met louder men, but not many emptier ones." Over the years, people tried to smooth things over. One of Toby's friends even reached out with a message, saying Toby meant no harm, that he respected Willie deeply. Willie nodded when he heard the message, thanked the messenger politely, and never called back. The truth was simple. Some divides weren't created in anger. They were created in disappointment. And once Willie Nelson lost respect for you, there was no winning it back. Not with apologies, not with time, not with success. From that day forward, there was an unspoken rule around Willie's circle. If Toby Keith is on the poster, Willie Nelson is not walking on that stage. 5. Merle Haggard was never just another musician in Willie Nelson's world. He was a brother in the trenches, a man Willie shared motel rooms, buses, cheap whiskey, and long, dusty roads with. Together they carved out the shape of outlaw country, raw, rebellious, honest. Their bond was forged in smoke-filled studios and midnight conversations about life, pain, and the price of being misunderstood. But sometimes the deepest cuts come from the ones who know you best. It started small, almost harmless, Merle making little jokes during interviews about Willie's weed activism. At first, Willie laughed it off, the way brothers do when someone teases a little too hard. But over time, Merle kept repeating the same line, that Willie was becoming more mascot than musician, more smoke than substance. It was meant to be lighthearted, but Willie had lived too much life to miss the sting beneath the humor. The moment everything broke happened on stage, in front of an entire crowd. Willie was just a few feet away, tuning his guitar, ready to join Merle for one of their easy, familiar duets. And then Merle took the mic and said, "Weed's a lazy man's crutch," turning to grin at the audience as they burst into laughter. Willie didn't laugh. He didn't smile. He didn't even look up. He simply played his part, strummed his guitar, sang his lines, and walked off stage the moment the set ended. He didn't wait for chatter, didn't stick around for drinks, didn't say goodnight. He walked straight to the bus with a quietness that hit everyone around him harder than any shouting match ever could. After that night, things shifted. A joint album they had talked about for months simply vanished from the schedule. Their phone calls, once full of jokes, stories, and late-night inspiration, slowed, then stopped. Willie's manager began turning down invitations that involved Merle, and no one pressed him for explanations they already understood. Fans kept asking when the two legends would reunite, when the world would get another duet, another tour, another slice of magic from the men who helped define a generation. But Willie never budged. He told a close friend, "Some things you don't joke about." And in his quiet, weary voice, it was clear the wound hadn't come from anger. It came from disappointment. When Merle Haggard passed away in 2016, Willie honored him with the words everyone expected, calling him one of the greats, one of the voices that shaped country music forever. But friends noticed something missing. He didn't call him one of his best friends. He didn't call him brother. And that silence said everything. Their story ended not with a fight, not with fireworks, but with a single moment on stage when a friend crossed a line Willie Nelson didn't think needed guarding until it was too late. 6. It's strange how a single sentence can destroy 40 years of loyalty. Willie Nelson always believed that time, songs, laughter, and road miles were stronger than ego. And for most of his life, Kris Kristofferson was proof of that. They weren't just collaborators. They were brothers in spirit. They survived the industry together, lived through its storms together, and held each other up in moments nobody else ever saw. But all it took was one careless night, one careless joke, one careless sentence for the ground beneath them to crack forever. It happened during a private fundraiser in the mid-2000s, the kind of smoky, whiskey-heavy night where legendary songwriters traded stories and half-finished lyrics like poker chips. Willie had just stepped off stage after performing a quiet, aching ballad about war and farm workers, one of those songs that came from deep inside him, from a place he didn't open often. The applause was soft but sincere. He sat down, tired but content, unaware that the moment was about to shift. Across the room, Kris leaned in toward a small circle of musicians. Maybe he was buzzed. Maybe he was trying to be funny. Maybe he didn't mean a single word. But intention doesn't always matter. What people hear is what people feel. And Willie heard him clearly. Willie's turned more into a mascot than a musician, Kris joked, and the people around him laughed. Those awkward, nervous laughs that land louder than they should. Willie didn't react at first. Friends who were there said he froze, not out of anger, but out of something quieter and deeper. Hurt, disbelief. That sentence didn't come from a stranger or a critic or some journalist hungry for controversy. It came from a man who once called him brother. And something about hearing it out loud, in a room full of people he respected, cut him in a way fame never could. He stood up. He didn't shout, didn't confront, didn't defend himself. He walked outside alone, and let the night air soak into his bones. The next morning, without explanation, he canceled their upcoming duet. Phone calls weren't returned. Invitations went unanswered. And when people asked what happened, Willie said almost nothing. Only one quiet sentence. Sometimes words don't fade. They stain. Chris tried to apologize later, through a mutual friend, sending messages of regret. But Willie shut the door firmly, not with anger, but with finality. "You don't get to call me brother after that," he said softly, and that was the end of a 40-year friendship. He never spoke badly about Chris in public. He never ranted. He never tried to hurt him back. That wasn't Willie's style. But he never let him back into that sacred inner circle again, because forgiveness may come easily to the heart, but trust is something entirely different. And Willie Nelson knew that once a bond breaks at the core, the pieces never fit the same way again. 7. Willie Nelson never walked into a studio expecting perfection. He didn't care about polish or ego or the kind of showy chaos some musicians wrap themselves in. He only ever wanted one thing: truth, a real moment, a real song, a real connection. And that was exactly why his short-lived collaboration with Kid Rock became one of the ugliest and most disappointing experiences of his entire career. It began around 2008, when Kid Rock was deep in his Southern outlaw phase, chasing an image more than a sound. He'd been floating around Nashville, dipping his toes into country, rock, Southern blues, anything that'd give him another identity to wear. Someone in his circle came up with an idea, a rebellious anthem that would pair Kid Rock's swagger with Willie Nelson's soul. Willie agreed, not because he needed it, but because he never feared risk. For him, music was curiosity, exploration, a chance to find something unexpected. But when Kid Rock showed up to the session, Willie felt the mistake instantly. Kid walked in late, beer in hand, sunglasses still on indoors, blasting one of his own tracks over the studio speakers, as if the room belonged to him. The musicians who were already set up exchanged quiet looks, half annoyed, half resigned. Willie just watched, calm and still, the way he always did when trying to decide whether someone was a storm or just a passing gust of wind. It didn't take long to find out. The moment recording started, Kid Rock pushed every control to its limit. He ignored direction, shouted over the engineers, drowned Willie's soft, smoky vocals under waves of distortion and pounding drums. Every time Willie tried to guide the music towards something cleaner, something more honest, Kid interrupted with, "Let it be raw," as if chaos alone could make a song meaningful. Then came the moment that broke everything. Willie, patient as always, suggested a softer arrangement, something the lyrics could breathe inside, something real. Kid Rock laughed, leaned back, and threw out a line that cut sharp when he realized. "Come on, old man, loosen up." The room froze. Willie didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He didn't even look offended. He simply took off his headphones, set them gently on the stand, and walked out of the studio without a single word. No one followed him. They knew better. When Willie Nelson leaves quietly, he's not coming back. The session ended right there. The track was never finished. It never saw daylight. Later, when a journalist asked Willie what happened, he didn't rant or insult or retell the chaos. He just said, "Some fires are better left unlit." A sentence soft enough to sound like wisdom, but sharp enough to slice through everything that had gone wrong in that studio. Behind that calm reply was real disappointment. Not anger, not outrage, but the weary understanding that not everyone who comes into your creative space deserves to be there. For Willie, Kid Rock had been nothing more than a loud voice mistaking volume for substance. A man chasing rebellion, without understanding the cost of living it. From that day on, Willie refused every invitation to work with him again. No features, no concerts, no jam sessions in his world. Kid Rock became just another person who mistook Willie's kindness for weakness and learned too late that gentle does not mean fragile. And Willie walked away from it the way he walked away from every bad storm in his life. Quietly, completely, and without ever looking back.